This episode is brought to you by Bitmex, the OG crypto exchange that is back and better than ever. You'll hear more about Bitmex later in the show.
End of the day, we're Web3 builders, and if you think about it, and Web3 is an economy. So there's decentralized finance. There's also the creator economy that now in part with NFTs. Web3 social is just another aspect.
All right, everyone. We have a fun episode of Empire lined up today. We have Stani Kulechov, the CEO and co-founder of Aave, and a lot more than that. Stani and the Aave team have been building something called Lens Protocol behind the scenes for quite a while now. Really interesting take on decentralized social media. It's a protocol. It's a Web3 social protocol. It's really exciting. We're going to be talking all about that. Before we get into that, Stani, man, you were just kicked off Twitter for saying that you were taking over as the CEO of Twitter. What happened here? What happened? Give us the behind the scenes story.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's been a bit of kind of like a context that's Elon Musk pretty much bought Twitter. And what that means that Twitter is becoming from a public traded company into a private company if the deal goes through. And one of the kind of like things that Elon Musk was mindful of is the freedom of speech. And I was pretty much kind of like exercising my freedom of speech by stating that because of these events, I'm going to be the interim CEO of Twitter. And obviously it was a joke, but it got a lot of traction for quite a while. And then I followed up of laying down a 90-day roadmap for Twitter, essentially including rolling out the edit button and shipping it out within a week, and also integrating with Ethereum, ENS as well, and integrating with the Lens protocol as well. So essentially, after a few hours, I got banned from Twitter.
So how's that experience to get banned? So did anyone in Twitter reach out to you? Did they explain why this happened? Did you ever initiate a discussion with anyone in the team to explain that it was a joke? Did they apologize? Like, what happened?
Yeah, I mean, there's basically, they send this kind of like a basic email saying that your account has been suspended, and you can, here's like basically you can argue that if you don't feel that the suspension was basically correct for you, and that was what happened. But also kind of like I was talking to a lot of people that are working at Twitter or past employees. I mean, at Aave we have past Twitter employees as well. I mean, half our data team is from Twitter. And kind of like we tried to create a bit of like a network effect and get the ban out, because the biggest issue for me was that like Twitter was for me and still is a social media platform that I use where I'm public facing, where I have my audience, and that's where I basically can communicate and keep people up to date what's happening like in my orbit. I share news about Aave, about our culture, or about the Lens protocol, and that was kind of like a exciting situation in the sense that when you actually get suspended and you don't have anymore this access, and you realize that the power and the control is on someone else's hands, and you can lose your followers like that, and your communication channel with your audience. That really makes you think, and especially because we are building the Lens protocol, decentralized social graph. So kind of like there's been always like a backbone idea of like we're providing the ability to users to own their profiles and relationships and the communication channel with their audience. But when it actually happens to you right there, you realize like, holy shit, how actually much power this platform have, and how less of transparency there is, because they're essentially black boxes, algorithms running in a way that we don't have any clue, like how the decision came from.
Yeah. And so like, obviously part of you laid out kind of a plan Elon is taking over Twitter. He is bringing, including in there CZ from Binance. He's putting in 500 million. Like I tweeted myself, hey, like if you're Elon, like why not consider like taking money from a DAO and like having a Web3 strategy? We talk a lot about Web2 companies, and they are obviously increasingly interested in Web3. You have consumer retail brands issuing NFTs. Is it possible for Twitter to kind of pivot to Web3? You obviously have Lens, which is on its own trying to probably replicate a lot of what Twitter is doing, but maybe walk us through like how does Twitter look like in the next 5 years? Can it actually credibly move to Web3 and somehow decentralize?
I think that's the most important question, because the way I see it is that the big tech companies and companies in general, Web2 companies, they've been built in a way where kind of like the users are pretty much creating the data. So you're constantly giving information to all these platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, what you like and what you don't like. And based on that, they have this massive amount of data which they're using to find out what actually you could be interested in buying or consuming in terms of attention. So you are selling your attention all the time to these platforms. And what is kind of like happening here is that the user is actually the product within the platform, because you're providing details, you're consuming products and services through advertisements, and you are actually not the one who is getting the end value. And the value goes from all these interactions back to the platform. They get more and more bigger IP that they hold. They control the data, and essentially profit goes to the shareholders. And the algorithms and the platform will have to be optimized within this kind of like a mindset. And I don't think the mindset is like faulty by default. There's, companies, capitalism is a way where we can actually incentivize behavior and make efficient products, efficient services. But the issue here is that it doesn't go to the user, and the user should be the epicenter of the value feedback loop and getting the end benefit from that. And changing this model to something where you are the user, you create a on-chain profile, and then you have your following relationship with other users, and you have this broadcasting channel. So let's say that if one application restricts you from showing content, you go to another one. So you basically have the control. So what it does actually, it changes the mindset and the way the companies have been built in a way where now they don't have control over the data. It's the user, meaning that they need to optimize everything what they're doing in a way where they're competing of creating the best user experience. They're competing for creating better algorithms with not just what they do internally, but with all the other applications out there, because you're relying on open protocol, and that takes a bit of time. And I don't think it's an issue. Like I think the more issue is like, how do you push this idea through the whole organization? That's the hardest part.
I think I'm going to push back a little bit on that, because conceptually, I love the idea. I totally agree with you. When you get banned, it feels very real, and it feels like the world it can be pretty precarious. Like now I'm wondering, well, I'm going to be careful what I tweet. Bankless YouTube channel just got shut down temporarily, and I think it was a mistake. And the CEO of YouTube was public about it and said, we made a mistake. But what we forget is, okay, when we're using Web2 applications, a lot of these social networks are free. I never pay for Twitter. I never pay for Facebook. And, they're kind of subsidizing a whole host of infrastructure on the back end. And there comes a cost to that. I think people should be aware whenever... Like there's no such thing as a free lunch. Like when we study economics, and I think that's very true in social networks, they monetize your activity and through advertising and a bunch of other ways, and monetizing that data. What is the business model for something like Lens? And question number one, and the second question is, in this world where users are trying to optimize their experience, does that degrade the user experience? Because we all talk about decentralization. We all talk about the promise of creating these applications. But at the end of the day, we also complain, God, the UX sucks. And so most users are not going to make that compromise. Like if Twitter is pretty slick interface.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question. I mean, essentially, when you have something like a decentralized social graph, essentially you change a bit the whole kind of like a landscape of how do you approach of not just kind of like the monetization, but how different products, services are built. And regarding the monetization, I think like currently, I definitely agree on the fact that if you're getting something for free, you are the product. So like you are paying for actually buying things, and this platform finding things that triggers your attention to buy. Twitter hasn't been very good at actually monetization to the extent, for example, what Google is doing, given they have a lot of information as well and data. But I think like for me, what's fascinating is that when you actually own your content, you own this the relationship with your audience. It basically means that your followers aren't anymore in the Twitter's database, and essentially it means that now actually anyone, any part of the world can actually come and create a better algorithm or better user experience and a new way of interacting with the content. Because I love Twitter as the UX, but with the same audience, you might have a different way of interacting, and it's very, very hard today to compete with big tech in terms of creating better user experiences and actually by creating new social media application. Because the first and the most important thing that you have to do is you have to create this big network effect. So no one is coming to no one wants to go to a party where no one is going. So if it's like empty, so if you go to an application, there is no one there. It's very hard, especially and I think Clubhouse was a good example. I mean, Santiago, you and me, we hang quite a lot in the Clubhouse during the COVID and explain how decentralized finance works
for context, we would do marathons of like, I think the longest standing one was 12 hours. Stani also met his significant other on Clubhouse.
Is that the same one that Stani took a nap mid Clubhouse?
Stani fell asleep at one point and left me hanging, but somehow his battery didn't drain. But anyways,
but so Stani, let me ask you this, just an extension of what of that answer that you were just giving. In like Web2 social, or really just social in general, is categorized by massive network effects, right? If you aren't a successful social media platform if you don't have hundreds of millions and in some cases billions of users, right? Will that look the same in crypto, right? Will the ones who win social networks in crypto be the ones who own all of the users, or is the business model set up differently so that that's not actually the case?
I think we'll see variations, because now the way it works is that it's pretty much like a numbers game in terms of like how big the network effects is, how much data you can combine, and based on that, you can be more accurate what you sell to the users and the end users. So this is the approach when we think about that the user is the product in Web3 social. And I think here's a bit different. For example, when you're not anymore basically a number in or a name in Twitter's database, and actually that's on a decentralized social graph, what actually happens is that it lowers the threshold of any developer, any part of the world, come and actually build a new way to interact with the social graph, with the content, or creating a better algorithms. So, for example, in my opinion, Twitter user experience is quite nice. I like the design, but for me, it's kind of sucks that I basically have just one algorithm that I can use. I would like to select, for example, change the algorithm that maybe finds new content that I'm interested in, or more followers and recommendations that actually might be interesting for me for some particular reason, and I could go away from my kind of like, the saying when we feel like with Twitter is an echo chamber, when you see all pretty much like more and more crypto Twitter, and every single tweet that you get in the feed is jam, and like I, for example, might want to have an algorithm that is just like more expansive a bit than normally. And this is the thing, like when you actually have a public infrastructure that anyone can consume, and build algorithms, build user experiences, you start to see developers coming up with creativity and trying new things. And this is something that happened in decentralized finance because, normally, you have a working banking system. You can send money from your bank account to your friends. Maybe it gets blocked. You send some paperwork, it gets unblocked, and everyone is happy. But no one is innovating actually because, and in decentralized finance, what we actually did, we created an open ecosystem and told every developer that, go and build something and create something new. And this is why we have, this massive, interesting, diversified financial infrastructure. And I think to the question, actually, I think when you open up the platform, the user experiences and algorithms, maybe the most successful social media kind of like application built on top of Lens isn't the one where you can basically get the most of the followers, but maybe it can actually kind of like emphasize who are the most important followers for you and how to interact with them in a more interesting way. So it's not anymore a numbers game, but maybe it's like how rich the social graph is in terms of value.
Stani, instead of monetizing with ads, and so let's say there's a decentralized Twitter, there's a Web3 Twitter. Instead of monetizing with ads, if I'm kind of extrapolating out like 5 to 10 years, we'll have a world where there are these mini social graphs on Twitter, right? Let's say everyone who likes crypto is in this part of Twitter, and everyone who likes music is in this part. Instead of monetizing the people who like music with ads for an upcoming concert, instead, on this decentralized Twitter, you would actually monetize by going out to applications and saying, look, you can build on top of this protocol. If you want to build like a music application, come build on this protocol, and you already have your users almost baked in, right? So now the problem of like trying to find users for this application is kind of fixed by the protocol. Am I in the same way that in DeFi, if you want to build something, the users are already there. You just need to build an incentive for them to come use your thing. Am I on the right track here, or do you see a different future?
Essentially, it's pretty much that every single application that is built on top of Lens Protocol is growth hacking users to every single other application on the same protocol, the same social graph, which is kind of interesting because let's say if you have 10 different applications, they bring users, they enlarge the graph. And of course, on the front ends, they can decide what they curate, from which application the users come, and they can curate the experience and curate what the end user sees and how the experience feels like. But that's the thing, like you where in decentralized finance you have this kind of like a pool of liquidity. In Lens Protocol, you have a pool of users essentially who are contributing and following and expressing interest. And I think regarding the monetization, what Lens Protocol does very well, it solves the social graph aspect. So you create a profile and then you have different followings based on who you want to follow, and having that on chain. So essentially, to give a bit of brief, when you create a profile, that's tokenized as an NFT, meaning that you can send it to cold storage, or later, if that profile is your brand, you can sell it. And then you can follow other profiles. So when I follow, for example, Santiago, and I'm the first follower, I'm in Santiago's first follow NFT. Now, Santiago might have 100,000 followers or maybe 200,000 followers in Lens Protocol. So all those followers are token ID'd, so there's rarity built in. But what's fascinating is that the follow NFTs are actually dynamic NFTs. So they will always reflect the latest content, what you publish in the Lens Protocol. So let's say that if Santiago publishes a picture of a cat, all those follow NFTs will reflect the picture of a cat. So for example, if I go to my, let's say, wallet or OpenSea and look at the follow NFT, I see the picture of the cat. And then if Santiago decides to post new content, it will reflect, let's say, a picture of a dog, it will reflect the picture of a dog. And so it's a dynamic distribution, kind of like a broadcasting channel on chain. But fascinating is that we decided we didn't want to actually solve much of the monetization part because we wanted to build one infrastructure. There's a couple of things we built in terms of monetization. Is that if you really like the picture of a cat, the picture of a dog, and let's say the dog has a funny cap, you can actually then mint a immutable NFT out of that. The same way as you will mint an NFT in different kinds of NFT drops or in Foundation when you buy digital art. So essentially you can do drops directly to your followers. And then another one is that you can amplify the content. So I like the picture of the dog, but I amplify, and I have, let's say, 1,000 users in my follower base. I can mirror that content, and if you collect it, I get part of the collection fee that Santiago as a creator sets. So it's basically monetizing, kind of like the retweet button. But these are just built-in monetizations, and I think like more interesting stuff will also be built by developers because the protocol itself is very modularized. So you can build new follow logic, you can build new reference, which is the comment logic, or the collect logic. And one example, we already have community contributions. So one of them was interesting follow logic where you pay to follow someone, but then that creator essentially will share with you the collection fees. So it's kind of like a creator fundraising at the same time. So it's just like mind-blowing how far you can go with this.
It's kind of crazy what you're actually describing right now, which is not just a social platform, but it's social tokens built into it, right? Because there's this concept. What always happens with like my friends and me, and I'm assuming a lot of other friend groups out there, is you follow someone pretty early, right? Like let's say I follow a musician on SoundCloud or an artist, a DJ I really, really like on SoundCloud, and then they blow up, or an Instagram account, a funny meme account when it has 3,000 followers, and then it gets to 300,000 followers and all my friends are following it. You always want to say, I was early to that account. Yeah. I followed that account early, right? Or like if I followed Santiago and he had 1,000 followers and now he's a big name, I'm like, oh my God, I've been following that journey. And what you're actually giving folks here is the ability to have upside in a creator that you're supporting from day one.
Yeah.
What is the problem that you guys are trying to solve? Is it that everyone lives in this bubble? Is it the business model of something like Twitter is broken? What is the problem that you guys are solving here?
For us, kind of like, I mean, the way we approach is that the social media space, it has different kinds of areas where you could actually make a lot of impact. So that might be, for example, content moderation, composability, might be, for example, the monetization aspect. So there's like a lot of areas that you can actually solve. And our approach was that we know that the space is very wide. There's multiple problems to solve. We basically want to solve the graph part. So essentially, how you can actually own, of course, your profile, but also in a way where you're not locked into one particular platform. So anyone who builds a new application, you can just pretty much sign with your wallet, log in, and you have your followers because you have your Lens profile there. So like how to make that work. So that's kind of like one of the key components. There's things that we added there, like the parts of the monetization, but essentially we wanted to figure out like how you can have a composable social graph that actually benefits and allows more innovation into the space. It's very tricky. For example, like we earlier talked about the Clubhouse example, is that the reason Clubhouse became popular because there was so much actually network effect, but behind that there was a lot of growth hacking, the invitation system, a lot of VCs were pushing the product. Like I think like in the beginning there's more VCs than anything else in the speaker rooms. And essentially, like if you find a new way to interact with content, you will have to go to the same process. You will have to growth hack your social media product, and that's very hard. So essentially, like if you just figure something small out and it's very exciting, suddenly, boom, you have this big network at your hands. And it's just like it democratizes the access to build social media, but also democratizes the end user in the way like how and what kind of tools they have. Maybe you are not happy with one particular application's moderation policy, you can go to the next one. And they actually compete in the sense like which of these applications are respecting your values most. So you can make value-based decisions.
What is the business model of someone building an app on top, right? Because when you look at what social media companies have today, they have incredible moats, right? So Twitter is really the only big social platform, maybe LinkedIn too, where I have like a following. So I'm going to end up spending a lot more time there. And I'm probably not going to leave Twitter because I've put so much time into it. What is the moat if you're building an app on top of the Lens protocol to keep the user? In the same way that if you look at finance, right? Like Bank of America has an incredible moat. I signed up for Bank of America when I was like 18 and I'm still haven't left it, even though it's a really shitty platform. But you look at DeFi, it's like Uniswap and Aave. They really have to fight for the user because the ability to leave is so easy in DeFi. So like, what does that look like when it's translated into the social world?
There's two different things, of course. Like there's the of course there's the community aspect, but what I think is also important is that what Lens Protocol, for example, does, it really takes one piece of the kind of like the layers of the social media and makes that public good, decentralizes it and makes users kind of like owners of their own graphs. And essentially, all the other layers are still there, and they do exist. So essentially, instead of like being only a number in social media platforms database, you have basically your data on that level is stored on chain. And what's different here is that the only thing that is disappearing is the locking mode. But locking as a mode, it's not always workable in the sense, there's been in history social media platforms where users are building their network in one particular place, but slowly, if that platform doesn't innovate, there's something interesting happening, you start to accumulate somewhere else your followings, which is sad because many people put a lot of effort actually building those networks. I mean, we all remember MySpace. Today, the application barely works. So just an example, like cases. But then those layers that are on top, basically the applications, there might be new ways to interact with the content. On that level, you have a lot of algorithms, so you can compete on that level as well. So, for example, if there's two similar looking applications, even same way of interacting content, but the other algorithm just is somehow more driven towards your values or finds content that you are more interested in, you might spend time. I mean, TikTok is a good example where the algorithm rewards something that becomes very funny or interesting, and it just like distributes the content in a very wide network. So there's going to be more and more options to the users, and based on your algorithms and your experiences, you can actually create a lot of monetization on top of that.
We interrupt your programming with a special announcement. Empire has a new sponsor. Santi and I are very excited to welcome Bitmex. That is right. Bitmex is back. The exchange we all know and love is back and better than ever. We're going to be dropping a couple updates on Bitmex over the next couple of months. This first one is a big one. Coming soon, Bitmex is rolling out their spot exchange, and they're giving away $500,000 in Bitcoin to new users. That's right. Listening to Empire has got the alpha. Santi and I got you. $500,000 in Bitcoin going to new users. For the OGs, I don't think I need to tell you why you need to use Bitmex. It's a love of the game kind of thing. You respect crypto, you use Bitmex. For those newer to the industry, Bitmex has a long and great history of innovation since their launch in 2014. They created perps and a whole lot more. Now they're back, they're better than ever, they're making waves. So what do you need to do? Go sign up for the Bitmex Spot Exchange for a chance to win some of the $500,000 in Bitcoin that Bitmex is giving away. Bitmex, bitmex.com. That's bitmex.com. Go make it happen. Now, let's get back to the show.
The type of data that exists on chain, is transactional in nature. You might be signing certain things, but it's okay, you might be communicating, you might be signing messages, but for the most part, it's like you bought an NFT, you swapped a particular token, you may have voted or are part of a particular DAO. And so you kind of, I think there's enough data there to start kind of the flywheel of curation. But there are other more discrete data points that just are probably going to not exist on chain because it's not very efficient, or you have an Oracle problem. And we can talk about what those are, but do you think that is going to eventually be a limitation on the kind of relationships that you can create, because inherently the data will not exist on chain, at least not in the foreseeable future?
I think what will happen is that, essentially on-chain data is very interesting, because you could have, for example, a scenario where, me, Santiago, we voted on Aave governance. So let's say if someone posts something about governance, that might appear in the feeds, which is like based on the on-chain data. But what we will see also is that many of these applications will start building layers on top of the on-chain infrastructure. So for example, they might have features or functions where you might create data, and they use this data combined with the on-chain data to basically find you more interesting things to read about or interact with. And then even more cooler thing will be that when we have actually a cross-application data layers. So let's say we have something, some sort of a data layer that actually you can integrate with your Lens application. And all those applications, maybe they collect the same data point and they can retrieve data from the same data points. And essentially you have a way to actually get more data and share it with the other applications, which is on top of the on-chain infrastructure. Because I don't think it necessarily needs to be that you have to have everything on-chain. You can build layers, like shared layers or application-specific layers. And those might help to like build that algorithm that they're interested in.
And so in that case, just so people get an idea, we talk a lot about signing in with Ethereum. And so instead of creating a username password, I might be able to sign in to Twitter with MetaMask or whatever, but like Web3 portal, and then tie to a particular wallet. And then you're saying you could scrape that and pull in that data feed, and then to further personalize and scrape kind of content that exists in Web 2, not on chain, to then further kind of another dimension of curation. Like, would that be possible? If you're signing into the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, or Facebook, like pretty much anything in Web 2 that might have at some point an ability to log in with a wallet, like with a Web 3 portal.
Yeah, you can do that. Essentially, if you ask the user permission, you can get data from, let's say, Twitter. You can get data from Instagram. I'm personally, I'm not the most like I think there will be a lot of combinations with like on-chain, off-chain data. I'm most interested in the Web3 footprint because there's sort of skin in the game there. Like, for example, when you participate in governance, you have an ENS, you have records there, you do various on-chain activity. That creates like an interesting profile. And the more the Web3 landscape expands from, let's say, from DeFi and DAOs and governance, NFTs into Web3 social, Web3 e-commerce, whatever, essentially, like, it's just like, it's new areas of data points, and usually you have skin in the game. It's just like very fascinating data point. Just a simple thing as POAPs, and POAPs is something where, it depends really about like what is the event, but many have from 8 hackathons. It might be something else, might be company internal POAP, but having those POAPs, they bring a lot of interesting data, who you could match. I could see even someone building a dating app on top of Lens Protocol, which basically,
for all of us out there single,
Santi, man, you need that.
Do I look that desperate? Jason, come on, man. That's why I'm going to permissionless, folks.
Need a bear market companion.
I know, right? That's really why I'm going on the conference circuit, really. No, so I do agree with you. I think blockchains are data rich, and we are at a, I think, relatively nascent part of the evolution of Web3, where there are limited types of data, but over time, I think it will get there. The thing that I've seen where social media is a very, very hard kind of space to crack. As much as we hate Facebook and Snapchat, and there are dozens of players that have tried to improve upon their model and have failed because there's this idea of activation energy. Most people, for the most part, will really not take that extra step to go and try a different platform. I remember I was one of the earliest kind of users of Facebook because I had gone to Harvard Summer School and I had a Harvard EDU email. And so I was able to get on relatively early, and it was very bare bones, but it was this idea of I knew certain people there in the platform. So that was what kept me there. So maybe it starts with crypto Twitter fanatics, and then over time it kind of expands. But this is kind of goes back to my question, which I was curious of are you working with, when you've obviously announced Lens in some way, shape, or form, you kind of dropped certain breadcrumbs. What has been kind of the reception? Who has reached out? Who has expressed interest? Is it purely kind of crypto native protocols and people? Have you gotten interest from Web2 companies? I'm just kind of trying to envision who's going to come and build these kind of applications, and what is the first kind of application for Lens going to look like in the next 6 months?
One thing about Web3 networks is that I realized that over the years that they don't need to grow very fast and quickly. Whereas Web2 social media platform, if it doesn't grow within a couple of 3 years, it goes to a graveyard. In Web3, when we look back, ENS, we look at even POAP. POAP is interesting because it started by one person going to events and Patricio giving the POAPs and a few years ago, and everyone's wondering what is going on, and there's fun, and and it's becoming a network itself. And then ENS
literally doing things that don't scale and to get to some product market fit, right?
Exactly
selling cereal boxes.
Wait, Stani, can you, I'm sorry, I know you're not done with that answer, but I actually still don't understand this. Why? And I want to make sure I don't end this podcast without fully understanding this. Why? It feels like all successful platforms, whether it's social media platforms or even financial platforms like Aave, right? Aave and Uniswap, and even centralized exchanges like a Coinbase or an FTX, they all need users to scale, and they all need network effects, and they need the liquidity of interactions. And liquidity of interactions in finance might be buy and sell, but liquidity of transactions on Twitter might be tweet and and retweet and things like that. So why do crypto-based social platforms not need users, like the network effects of users? I'm still not fully getting that.
You always need, of course, network effect of users. The difference between Web2 and Web3 social is that in Lens Protocol, you create your profile once. Obviously, if you have brands and whatever, you can create more. But basically, you create your profile once, and you have those followers. So that's yours to keep. It's the same idea of you own your keys, you own your crypto. So
I see. So the user's already there. I see. I get it. Yeah, the users are there already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing, because every single one user in social graph means also one new user in all of the applications. I mean, obviously you can curate as an application level more that only users that came through this application will pretty much be shown in this application. You can do a lot of curation, but essentially as you will sign up, as you will create a profile in Lens Protocol, it will be equivalent of creating a profile in, let's say, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at once. And if you come from one of those applications, you reach in the whole graph. And for me, it's for us the kind of this has been launched a couple of months ago, the testnet, and what's cool has been is that we started with a hackathon. So obviously the main idea is that we have smart contract-based protocol, and we want actually to see what kind of applications could be built. So within the first application, the hackathon, LF Grow, we had 530 hackers and over 126 submissions in a under 2-week hackathon, which is outstanding numbers. It means that there are developers that are actually interested in the space, and they want to build things. And we saw within those 2 weeks actually full front ends being built. So Lenster.xyz is a good example, and there's a bunch of other fascinating project being built. So it just showcases like how quickly you can build a social media application when you don't need to think about the back end that much.
Again, I want to go back to the idea of monetization, and not just like in the context of Lens, but just generally, because when the user is in control, meaning Chris Dixon, I think, talked about this really eloquently, much better than I will, which is like when you have your wallet is kind of, it places so much power on the user, and it may be difficult. This is what Jason was trying to say, I think, earlier, which is it's difficult to kind of own the relationship with a customer. It kind of puts more pressure on the company to deliver value, and you have all these different people trying to curate and serve and create useful applications. I think in Web3, I think the entity or the person that benefits the most is the consumer, the end user, which owns the data, can port it over, whether you're in gaming, NFTs, DeFi, like your wallet unlocks so much value. But what does that mean for, at some point, like you have to have some business model for these people that are rendering the curation and all this stuff, like, but I'm still having like a bit of trouble like bridging that.
No, I'm with you, Santi. I'm with you there. Like, where's
Jason,
the revenue?
You know what I mean? Like, and maybe it's like we don't really know what that monetization model is going to be.
Well, yeah, like in DeFi, if the revenue is coming from fees, right? Like where's the revenue?
DeFi is super straightforward. It's a swap fee. That's it.
Yeah. So where's the I guess there's the question there. Where's the revenue coming from then, Stani?
I mean, basically for the creators, essentially, because like their content is tokenized. So that's pretty much like one way of monetizing. So you can sell your content. So we all have NFTs here. So we already pay for NFTs. And essentially on a social graph like Lens Protocol, you can pretty much create anything. You can create art, you can create just regular content. And actually, like, it's not, you can even drop an album, but it removes the idea of kind of like having a medium. It creates mediumless creators, because let's say that you as a creator, let's say Billie Eilish, you drop an album on Lens Protocol, hypothetically. I mean, I want it to happen, but let's say hypothetically. And maybe you will have, out of a few million followers, maybe you have certain percentage that will actually buy that as NFT, the album drop. But then at the same time, Billie Eilish can, just post content that says, make love, not war, and people will collect that as a basically piece of content. The same way as Pleaser.
And in that case, do you need to own? Does Billie Eilish need to own the Lens? Is there a Lens token here? Do you need to kind of stake that Lens token to uphold your reputation? Is there some sort of fee, like OpenSea style, where if there's a transaction happening, then part of those fees will go to Lens?
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is that as a creator, when you set those fees, so you set essentially the collection fee, and because it's modularized, you can set there can be different kinds of collection logic. So it can be auction. So you can just post a content, 24-hour auction. Who wins gets it. So it's typical foundation style or OpenSea auction. Then it might be fixed price, limited amount of copies. It might be even you can collect on a certain time period, let's say 24 hours. So that's basically what you can do, and you can set those fees. Then what we created is that the protocol itself can collect fees as well into the protocol treasury, but that is set to 0. So our goal is to be after having the protocol live and to see that how many users there are and how much there's utilization, transfer the whole ownership of the protocol progressively to the community, and the community then can decide what to do with the fees and what not, and whether something like this happens. But that's more of like kind of like speculation for us. Like for our team especially, we always try to build something that works. If it works, if it creates an impact, maybe it inspires some other new protocols to be created. But that's so the monetization is just like we created a seed for that, so anyone can monetize their NFTs. But there's so many things you can build on top. It's quite agnostic.
Yeah. And look, I mean, it's totally fair answer to say we don't know yet, because I think like sometimes, to your point, if you just build things that provide value and people are interacting and communicating, like I'd rather as an investor place my chips on that and saying, if you're tapping into like a fundamental like human need, then it's easier to figure out the monetization piece after. Whereas if you're creating like a product that no one wants, like, no amount
right.
of
I mean, nearly every
engineering.
business starts incredibly niche, right? If you look at eBay, it starts with just collectibles, or Facebook didn't start as Facebook. It starts as just a social network for for colleges, right? So
I am curious, why does a money market kind of DeFi bank all of a sudden wake up one day and say, yeah, I think we're going to build a social graph here?
I think end of the day, we're Web3 builders, and if you think about it, and Web3 is an economy. So there's decentralized finance. There's also the creator economy that now in part with the NFTs. Web3 social is just another aspect. There might be at some point Web3 e-commerce and so forth. So like for us, what is important is that to find where we could actually make an impact. And how to do that in the Web3 community. And I think beyond that, what's for me personally very interesting is that once you have a decentralized social graph, you can actually turn it into a trust graph. And when it's a trust graph, you can actually enable interesting things like credit and under-collateralized lending. And that's kind of like where we could go towards. But that's very early. So it's something that takes a bit time, and we'll see like how this plays out. I mean, even back in the days, we had POCs of using ENS names as a collateral. So you kind of use you could use your profile as a collateral as well. But end of the day, it's more about creating interaction data and understanding what users have. And also, interesting fact is that if you have a profile that has good monetization, what you can actually do is you could use that as a collateral if there is constant revenue stream. And that's something that's very fascinating from DeFi aspect.
Yeah, I certainly believe that. How do you solve for like the Sybil problem here? A person might have 100 wallets. And yeah.
I mean, Sybil problem
does it matter?
Yeah. It matters to some extent, at some extent doesn't. So what I'm fascinating personally is a concept of social verification. So let's say that Twitter currently gives blue check marks based on their own assessment, right? What could be fascinating is that you could create and bootstrap communities that could actually do the social verification. So let's say decentralized social graph is a big data dump. There can be a lot of good profiles, a lot of bad profiles. It's the same as many of these Web2 databases. But what's fascinating is actually who has verified a profile from a community standpoint. So let's say that I know Santiago, he comes and visits me in London. So, and we're friends. So basically I can socially verify that this person is verified by me. Same for you, Jana. And then maybe I meet your friend somewhere, let's say in permissionless, and I can verify that person too. So and then you can create verification communities, and also you can even aggregate those verifications. So you can, by curation, you can solve a lot of things. But for me, the next step from here, where a lot of things will move, is when you can actually do social verification on facts as well. So let's say if I post something like, hey, I'm the interim CEO of Twitter, so maybe people at Twitter can actually kind of like verify that, this is like, and flag it to somewhere, like maybe this isn't correct, or, maybe the, crypto Twitter folks will say that this is correct or just funny. Like there might be a lot of like labeling and data on those verifications. So like, which could actually fight things like fake news and so forth. So like that's the kind of aspect that there's a lot of to do for the curation as well. But that's something that has to be built on top.
There's a paper out of UPenn from 2015 that talked about credit scoring and credit scoring in a kind of socialized or decentralized manner here. One of the things that it found is that it actually causes users to engage less and like form closer ties with the smaller communities, and that it actually kind of pushes people away from people who might be like quote unquote low credit people. Does that feel like a problem for you guys to solve, or does that feel like a problem for like the apps built on top of Lens Protocol to solve, or you're not even thinking about something like that right now? Way too early.
Very fascinating research, and I would say that if someone creates a algorithm that basically takes into account that if you follow someone who has lower credits, like kind of like score or whatever, and this is public. In the first place, you have to be very transparent what data you're using, because now the users have the power. They own the graph, they own the profiles, they own the relationships. So like you are the epicenter as a user. So it creates a competition where everyone needs to be more transparent on their algorithms, because there will be some provider who will be and even open sourcing their algorithm. So essentially what it means that someone will come and just create an algorithm and says that, what, we don't do that, and use this, and you have choices as a user. But if you're using something where you're locked in a platform, you don't have that freedom. So it's all about creating opportunities and freedom for the user.
Is there a downside of having all of users' social data on a blockchain, right? Because when you look at something like Etherscan, I can see every transaction that's going in and out on Ethereum, and it's obviously amazing. You've got this incredibly transparent ledger, but on the flip side, I'm not sure I want people seeing like what I just liked on Instagram and TikTok, right? And I'm not sure I want my stupid tweets from 2007, 15 years ago, stored forever on a blockchain. So is there a downside to some of this stuff?
There is. And for example, this is one of the reasons we also, we don't have a like button on the protocol level. You can build on an application level a like button, reactions buttons, some other new cool things. Now you can be like 15, 18 years old and just build a new application on top of Lens Protocol, and that might become a big and popular application. So like, I would say that you can build a lot of things on top into a private database, but I'm also fascinated about using something like zero knowledge proofs of actually creating private photos, private profiles, and adding that functionality. But I think like once we achieve that kind of like a base layer, where you have this visibility, transparency, then the next thing is to figure out like what techniques are used, because obviously you can build on a lot of things on databases, but then like how you could actually use cryptography to make a lot of things private. That's going to be the next step.
Stani, could Lens be bigger than Aave one day?
Well, we'll define the parameter by bigger. Market cap or users or?
I think users probably. No, I actually don't think users is the right metric to look at there, because obviously there's going to be a lot more users on a social platform than a financial platform. The parameter might be, I don't know, revenue, cash, how much it's making. I don't know, normal business metrics.
Good, interesting metric is that like how many people care about finance in general. Like how many people, if you take like like a one particular, like, or how much time people spend on finance, like how much time you spend on.
Yeah. I would say like a lot of people
2%
care
yield.
about finances, but don't think about every day. Like you don't go to the bank every day. You check your phone at least 50 times a day because you want to interact with people that you care about.
Exactly. So like that's like
Right.
like if you spend maybe once a week to tweak your yield farms, that's the amount you put energy into that and attention. But if you go to an application and spend there 2 hours a day, or in crypto Twitter 16 hours a day, what value that has. So
Maybe a question is, do you envision a world where we just move totally off of Web2 platforms? Or are you complementing what you're seeing in a Web2 context? Meaning you're still in parallel, you're still going to be using Twitter, and then you're still going to be using Lens for different things. And they somehow complement each other, not replace? Or are you replacing?
Ideally, Twitter should integrate the Lens protocol. Like that was part of my 90-day plan when I was interim CEO of Twitter. but
Okay, so why don't you just create a DAO and call up Elon and say, hey, listen, or CZ, and to get CZ to, out of his 500 allocation, give us a slug. And as a community, we'll fund it. Because I actually do think, like, jokes aside, like, why wouldn't you, if you're Elon, you want to kind of boost the credibility of Twitter? As much as we think Twitter is like the best thing ever, most people outside of crypto Twitter think it's like a dead platform and don't use it. But like if you spin NFTs and like you spin like, I think that is kind of a good way to reinvigorate Twitter. So why don't we just create a DAO?
Call up Andreessen. Andreessen's putting in what, 400 million for this? CZ is at like 500 million?
No, I'm saying what probably easier was through CZ.
I think it makes a lot of sense because, I mean, if you put this DAO, I'm definitely in because I think there should be also like more native Web3 voice on platform like that big, even though we don't know how easy it will to get some of these changes and the Web3 aspects and how the whole Twitter organization thinks about it. But like it's gonna be something that drives the space toward Web3, and I just don't think like. I think both worlds need to exist. You have decentralization, then you have, centralization, you have services, you have companies. Like there's just like two different layers and they interact with each other. That will happen. But seeing Twitter going towards Web3 more, that will be very successful for our mission because, it's good for everyone.
Well, let's not forget Twitter they have Blue Sky, Santi, remember?
Twitter?
Twitter built a group called Blue Sky as like the nonprofit.
Like under Jack, and I don't even know what.
Yeah, but the goal is to develop, as they say in their words, a decentralized social network protocol. So this might be actually a direct competitor to Lens. Maybe. I'm very biased. I think they should build on Lens, but
I think you need to have. I think I'm more on the camp of you need to have credibility by opening up integrations with Web3 protocols, as opposed to trying to build it in-house. Like,
you need the community on your side.
I see a mesh here where, like, the same way that you're probably never going to stop using Bank of America for certain things, even though Bank of America is.
No, I will. I hopefully will.
But you're still, what I mean? But you're still going to have, like, DeFi doesn't totally, I think, replace finance. I think financial institutions start working with DeFi, and they just act as front ends and user aggregators to tap into this world and as a settlement layer. And in a similar manner, I just think that like Web2 social networks, if they're going to be relevant in the next 20 years, they're going to probably at some point enable users to integrate their two lives. Call it you're living in the real world in the metaverse. Well, you need a bridge to like mesh those interactions and amplify them, not replace them. Because we're still going to live in the metaverse. And we're going to live in the real world where there's inflation and you have to eat. And so I think like if you're Twitter right now, like you want to be relevant, you want to kind of catapult into a next leap, and I think that's what's exciting. Where if I'm Elon, I would probably like seriously consider like enabling Web3 support and opening up to the Web3 community as opposed to trying to build it in house. because it reminds me so much of the like
I agree with
L1s,
that.
L1s of like Corda and all this.
It's like when
Hyperledger
JP Morgan launched, what was it, the fork of Ethereum, Quorum or something? It's like
whatever this crap is. No one has never used. It's like closed source. Yeah.
Stani, I know we're coming up on time here. I did want to ask you one thing. What is the tech stack on your guys' end for this? So you guys built on Polygon. Is like some data stored? Are you guys using like Arweave, IPFS? Like what is your kind of tech stack for this?
Yeah, so pretty much all of the infrastructure, it's some smart contracts, and we deployed on Polygon. So what the next part is, of course, like we want to have a bit of like cross-chain functionality, but that's a different story. In terms of the data storage, the protocol is very much agnostic to data and how you store. So you can use IPFS, you can use Arweave, you can even use S3, if you want to. So essentially, you can choose where you store. So for example, if you use one application and they have a setting for you to store in IPFS, that will be the solution. So if there's future solutions, they can be plugged in easily.
Got it. Cool.
Anyone out there that is listening, like, where can they find more about Lens? Where should they go work for Lens? Are there grants available? I know you're huge sponsors of hackathons. Like, what is the best way for someone out there listening saying, okay, I want to build on top of Lens or something?
Yeah, so lens.dev is a good place for information and seeing basically how the protocol works, what you can build. We have outstanding documentation, and we made it as simple as possible to build on top of the Lens protocol or integrate it. And also we have a grants program, so we call it the fertilizer. So the idea is that we already had one round of grants, and we have a next one. So it's ongoing basis. You can apply for different kinds of grants, whether you are integrating Lens into a Web2 social product, or you just want to make your current product social but Web3 native, or building something very, very new. Yeah, and of course, if you're an end user, you're a believer in Web3 social, owning your profile and your relationship with your audience, what you can do is you can go to lens.dev and sign a open letter there, and you can even share that on Twitter, essentially, and that's a kind of like a open letter about how we believe that's why social should be open.
Are we all gonna get banned if we do this?
You're gonna end up into a tracking
jail
list.
Yeah. Yes, I'm moving on the shit list.
Yeah.
Great. This is awesome. Any like parting thoughts? I mean, it's super exciting. I mean, I think social has been tried in Web3 before. I think these are one of the first kind of things that like steam it, stuff like this. But I think the time is right at the intersection of NFTs, gaming, and it stitches all together very nicely. We're doing more. We're spending more time on chain, so it makes a whole lot of sense. Maybe timeline before parting thoughts, but timeline. When can we start like seeing like a really nice front-facing application?
Soon.
This is the politically correct answer, so that none of the engineers working on this give Stani a hard time. So I appreciate that.
Exactly. But yeah, thanks for having me here. It was amazing, and the questions were super exciting. So I really am a believer in Web3 social, and it's going to be interesting to see what kind of things are going to be built. But it's a process. So I think decentralizing something big as social media will take twice as long as decentralizing finance.
You heard it from the man who went through brutal bear markets and is one of the best builders in the space, and the host that's appeared the most on this podcast. So Stani, always a pleasure, man.
Thank you so
thanks
much.
for building this. I think if anyone's going to pull it off, it's you and your team. So congrats on everything, and I think it's much needed in the space. So keep at it.
Amazing. Thank you.
Take care, Stani.